it's great to see so many people on here, including people I know who I wasn't necessarily expecting to see here. And I think I love communities like this where people are coming together to help each other. And I think the value to this is really huge. And having people as members of your group who've had transplants specifically, since that's what we're talking about today, I think in many ways you can learn so much more from them than you can from me. So it's great to see the people who I know who have had transplants who are participating in this group. Just a quick outline of what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about some basics about lung transplant. We'll talk about the evaluation and listing process. We'll talk about the transplant itself. We'll talk about life after transplant. And as part of that, we'll get into why someone would want to do all of this and have a transplant. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about research. I promise it won't be getting too into the nitty gritty, but I do think this is an important time in lung transplant research. And I think it may influence people's decisions about how they're going to proceed. And then I want to close out with some tips if you're considering a lung transplant, sort of my perspective on some tips that might help you. A few caveats. I practice at one center. I have some experience with what other centers do, but practices vary between centers. And so I'm going to try and keep things as general as possible. It's very hard to answer specific questions about other centers' practices, but I'll try and keep things as broad and generally applicable as possible. I know that there's members of this group who are in countries outside the United States, and there's even more variation, especially when I'm talking about things like allocation of organs, who gets the lungs, how is that decided? That can be very different among different countries. So take that with a huge grain of salt if you're outside the US. And for more specifics, it's always a good idea, specifics about you or specifics about the center you're thinking about. Talk to your center, talk to your doctors to get sort of more nitty-gritty detail that might apply to you. So with those caveats out of the way, let's get into the basics. So what is a lung transplant? The easiest way to answer questions these days is Wikipedia. And Wikipedia says that a lung transplant is a surgical procedure in which a patient's diseased lung or lungs are replaced by lung or lungs which come from a donor. That's a very good definition. I think it's kind of a perfect definition. This is a good moment to pause and recognize that basically everywhere in the world, certainly this is true in the United States, that donated lungs come from deceased donors. These are people who've died and either they or their loved ones have decided to donate organs to help others. And without the generosity of organ donors and their families, none of this would be possible. So another way to define what is lung transplant is that it's a treatment, just like many other medical treatments. It's a treatment for end-stage lung disease. And I would consider it a treatment that's utilized when other treatments have not worked. Typically medical treatments have failed. Obviously, lung transplantation is a treatment for pulmonary fibrosis, and that's what we're focused on today. But it's a treatment for other lung diseases as well, including COPD, cystic fibrosis, and pulmonary arterial hypertension.